The ruined field was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brought peace. Smoke still lingered in the air, and broken pieces of the past lay scattered across the ground. It was here that the humans stumbled upon the cubs. They were small, their eyes wide with fear, their bodies pressed low to the earth as if the very ground could protect them. Every sound, a distant crack of falling stone, a rustle of the wind, made them flinch. They did not understand what had happened or why their world had turned into chaos. The humans stood still, watching them for a long moment. In their trembling shapes, there was something fragile, something worth protecting. Slowly, the human knelt down, careful not to scare them further. The cub's eyes lifted, uncertain but desperate for safety. In that broken place, an unexpected bond began to form, born not of blood, but of survival. The soldier had seen many things in war, ruins, fire, loss, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of the trembling cubs. His training told him to move on, to keep his guard up, yet something deeper rose inside him, stronger than orders or duty. It was instinct, raw and undeniable. Slowly he lowered his weapon and dropped to one knee, making himself smaller, less threatening. The cubs watched with wide, fearful eyes, their ears twitching at every distant sound. He extended his hands, palms open, showing he carried no harm. For a long moment, the air between them was heavy with silence, only the sound of their quick breaths filling it. The soldier's heart pounded, but it was not fear. It was the urgent need to protect. In that moment, the battlefield faded. There was no uniform, no mission, only the fragile lives before him and the instinct to keep them safe. The silence of the ruined field was broken in an instant when gunfire split the air, sharp and violent like a storm tearing open the sky. The sound echoed across the broken walls and empty ground, each crack louder than the last. The cubs flinched as if struck, their small bodies collapsing against the earth, eyes wide with panic. They pressed themselves low, trying to disappear into the soil, their trembling a raw picture of fear. The soldier's heart tightened as he saw them struggle to even breathe. To the cubs, the roar of war was not just noise, it was death itself, hunting them in every echo. He wanted to shield their ears, to quiet the storm outside, but all he could do was crouch closer, making himself a barrier. In that terrifying moment, he understood. These cubs had already lost more than any child should, and the war would not spare them again. The gunfire still cracked through the distance, but the human moved without hesitation. He bent low and pressed his palms gently over the cubs' small ears, trying to shield them from the harsh roar that made the ground tremble. His touch was firm, yet careful, as though his hands could become a wall against the chaos outside. The cubs still shook, their eyes wet and wide, but they looked up at him as if searching for something, anything to hold on to. He whispered soft words, sounds of comfort they could not fully understand, but the tone carried more than meaning. It carried safety. His breath was steady, unlike the storm of war that raged beyond. The cubs clung to his arms, their trembling slowing just a little. In that fragile moment, surrounded by destruction, the soldier was not a fighter. He was simply a protector, standing between innocence and the cruelty of a world at war. The cubs trembled, their small bodies still tense as the sounds of war lingered in the distance. For a moment, they seemed ready to flee, their instincts urging them to run from anything larger and stronger. Yet something in the human's presence held them still. His hands, though rough from battle, carried no harm, only a steady warmth that spoke louder than any words. The cubs' breaths came in quick bursts, but they did not pull away. Their eyes, wide and filled with fear, began to soften as they watched him kneel lower, showing he meant no threat. The human did not push, did not force them closer. He only waited, shielding them from the chaos outside. In that pause, a fragile thread formed. The cubs began to sense he was not another enemy, but a shield against the storm. Their trembling lessened, and though fear still clung to them, trust quietly took its first step forward. The human pressed himself low to the ground, his frame bending forward to cover the trembling cubs. The sharp cracks of gunfire echoed in the distance, each sound carrying danger, yet his presence created a barrier between them and the chaos. Dust and smoke drifted in the air, but within the curve of his body there was a small circle of safety. The cubs pressed closer, their tiny forms seeking comfort against his steady frame. He said nothing, only breathed slowly, letting them feel the calm that he forced into himself despite the fear clawing at his chest. To the world outside, war raged on without mercy. But inside that fragile shelter there was a pause, a fragile pocket of peace. The cubs began to relax, their shivers fading little by little, as they realized that this strange figure was more than a soldier. He was a shield standing between them and the storm. The human's eyes softened as the cubs huddled closer to him, their small bodies trembling at every distant crack of war. In that moment, his mind drifted back to his own childhood, memories of nights filled with fear when the world felt too big and too cruel. He remembered the way shadows had seemed alive, the way silence had been heavy, and how he had wished for someone to protect him. That old feeling struck him again, but this time, it wasn't for himself. It was for the cubs pressed against his side, looking at him with wide, uncertain eyes. He felt their fragility, their helplessness, and something deep inside hardened into resolve. Whatever happened outside, he would not let harm touch them. The memory of his own fears became fuel, a silent vow. He would be the strength he once needed, the shield he never had, and the comfort these cubs now desperately sought. For a short moment, the battlefield grew strangely quiet. The endless roar of guns faded, leaving only the crackle of distant fires and the heavy smell of smoke in the air. The human tightened his arms around the cubs, feeling their small hearts race against his chest. They peeked up cautiously, their ears twitching, sensing that the danger had not gone but had only paused. The silence was not peace. It was the heavy stillness that came before more violence. Yet in that fragile pause, the cubs finally had room to breathe, their trembling slowing under the human's shield. His own chest rose and fell heavily, the weight of the moment pressing down, but he refused to let fear show on his face. He knew the chaos would return at any second, but for now, he held them steady, as if the strength in his arms could convince them that survival was still possible. One of the cubs slowly raised its head, its small body still trembling, but its eyes locked onto the human's face. The fear was there, raw, heavy, unshakable, but beneath it, something else flickered. The cub did not look away, as if searching for an answer, as if the human's calm could be borrowed, piece by piece, and turned into courage. The man held its gaze, steady and unbroken, offering no words this time, only quiet strength in the way he stood, unflinching despite the danger around them. The cub's breaths grew slower, its trembling easing slightly, as if it was learning that fear did not have to mean surrender. In that fragile exchange, something shifted, a spark of trust, a fragile attempt at bravery born not from strength alone, but from the bond forming between protector and protected, between the one shielding and the one daring to believe in his shield. The human leaned closer, his voice low and steady, the kind of tone meant to calm even when the words themselves might not be understood. He whispered promises, simple and soft, that no harm would reach them as long as he stood near. The cubs could not know the meaning of his language, yet something in the way he spoke carried through. The rhythm, the warmth, the quiet certainty that wrapped around them like a shield. Their breathing slowed, their eyes blinking with less fear, as if the sound itself built a wall stronger than stone. For the human, those words were more than comfort. They were a vow, one born from instinct and memory, a promise he intended to keep no matter the cost. And though the cubs could not answer, the way they leaned just slightly closer was proof they had heard and, more importantly, believed. The quiet moment ended in an instant when fresh gunfire cracked through the air, louder and closer than before, shaking the ground beneath them. The cubs jolted in terror, their small claws digging into the soil as if trying to hold on to something solid in a world that was falling apart. Smoke drifted through the ruined field, the sharp echoes bouncing between broken walls, each shot carrying the weight of danger. The human's heart raced, but he did not let fear show on his face. Instead, he lowered himself even more, his body once again a barrier between the cubs and the chaos. Their wide eyes flicked up to him, searching for guidance, for calm, for safety. And though the thunder of war raged on, his steady presence told them they were not alone. Fear pressed hard on them all, yet within it grew the fragile seed of trust. This time, when the harsh sound of battle filled the air, The cubs did not sink fully into panic. Their small bodies trembled. But instead of hiding their faces in the dirt, they pressed closer to the human, as if his strength could flow into them. They felt his heartbeat, steady and unbroken, even while the world outside shook with violence. Their breathing began to match his, slower, stronger, as if borrowing courage they had never known they could hold. The human did not push them away, nor did he falter. He stayed firm, knowing they needed him as much as he needed to keep them safe. For the first time, the cubs' fear did not control them. Deep inside, something stirred, fragile but growing, like the beginning of a roar still waiting to find its voice. And in that moment, survival no longer felt impossible. The rifles cracked again, their sharp echoes tearing through the smoke-filled air, but this time, something different happened. One of the cubs, the smallest of the group, lifted its head despite the trembling in its body. Its chest rose, and from its throat came a faint, shaky growl. It was not loud, it was not strong, but it was real. The sound carried a meaning that no weapon could silence, a refusal to remain helpless. The human felt the vibration of that tiny growl against his side, and he froze for a moment, struck by the courage hidden within such fragility. The other cubs turned their wide eyes toward their sibling, their fear shaken by the spark of something new. Even in its weakness, the sound cut through the thunder of war. It was not fear speaking anymore. It was defiance. A small beginning, but enough to show that the will to resist had awakened. The weak growl still echoed in the human's ears, and it stirred something deep inside him. He looked at the small cub, its body shaking yet refusing to bow to fear, and he felt a surge of pride he had not expected. This moment was no longer just about hiding them or keeping them alive until the battle passed. It had become something greater. He saw in their eyes the spark of courage, fragile but alive, and he realized his role was more than a shield. He was here to teach them that even the smallest heart could stand against terror. As bullets cracked again in the distance, he whispered words of encouragement, his voice calm but firm. The cubs leaned closer, listening, their fear still present but no longer in control. Pride filled his chest because in their trembling defiance, they were already learning to rise above fear. The trembling that once held the cubs captive began to fade as they pressed together, drawing strength from one another. At first, their voices were scattered, broken by fear, but then something shifted. With the human's steady presence beside them, they lifted their heads and let their cries break free. What started as small, shaky growls grew into something stronger, something that pushed past the smoke and noise of battle. Their roars, though young, carried far across the ruined field, rising above the harsh cracks of rifles. For a moment, it seemed as if the war itself paused to hear them. The human watched with wide eyes, awe filling his chest as he realized the cubs were no longer just enduring, they were fighting back in their own way. Their voices, once hidden by fear, now carried the power of defiance, a roar louder than the battlefield itself. The sudden sound of young roars made nearby soldiers pause, their heads snapping toward the unlikely scene. What they saw was not just a lone human crouched in the dirt, but a figure that looked like a shield, standing firm with frightened yet defiant cubs gathered at his side. The image struck them harder than the gunfire. These were not helpless creatures anymore, nor was the human simply a soldier in battle. He had become a protector, a wall between innocence and chaos. The cubs' cries echoed louder with each second, forcing the soldiers to feel something beyond the fight. A reminder of why they fought in the first place. For a brief heartbeat, war seemed to shrink back before this strange union. It was not the sight of weapons that unsettled them, but the impossible roar of courage rising from both man and cubs against the face of fear. For the briefest of moments, the battlefield seemed to hold its breath. The clash of rifles, the echo of boots, even the shouting, all softened, as if the world itself had been startled into silence. The cubs' trembling roars had broken through the noise of war, carrying something raw and unshaken. It was not strength in the usual sense, but a courage so pure that it unsettled the rhythm of violence. Soldiers on both sides glanced toward the sound, their hands still gripping weapons, yet their focus pulled away. The human, still crouched with arms spread wide, felt the strange stillness settle around them like a fragile shield. Smoke drifted across the ground, curling into the quiet, while hearts beat louder than the guns. In that fleeting pause, the line between enemies and allies blurred, as if all who heard were reminded of the fragile lives that trembled, yet still dared to defy fear. Their eyes met in the haze of smoke, and time seemed to slow. The cubs, still pressed close to his side, lifted their heads one by one, gazing up at the human with wide, unblinking eyes. He looked back, his face carrying no promise of victory, only the quiet strength of someone who refused to abandon them. In that moment, no words were needed. The cubs understood through his steady presence that he would stand with them, no matter how dangerous the storm around them became. And he, in turn, saw in their fragile courage a reason to keep fighting, not just for himself, but for the lives now tied to his own. The bond formed silently, as unshakable as stone, yet as gentle as breath. It was not built on language, but on shared fear, shared hope, and the unspoken vow that neither would face the chaos alone again. The enemy soldiers paused, their steps slowing as their eyes tried to make sense of the strange sight before them. A single human knelt in the dirt, surrounded by small cubs whose roars, though trembling and thin, carried a strength that cut through the chaos. It was not a sound of weakness, but of defiance, and it unsettled the enemy more than any weapon could. Their gunfire, once steady and sharp, lost its rhythm as doubt slipped into their hands. Some glanced at each other, uncertain if they were facing an opponent or witnessing something far greater. The sight of innocence refusing to bend, standing beside a human who shielded them, was unlike anything they had seen in battle. For the first time, fear did not belong to the young or the weak. It spread quietly through the hearts of those who thought themselves strong. The cubs, once trembling and pressed into the dirt, began to change before his eyes. Their fear had not vanished, but it had shifted into something else, something stronger. The shaking in their bodies slowed, their eyes no longer wide with panic but steady with determination. Each beat of their small hearts seemed to echo the rhythm of the human's calm presence, teaching them that they were not alone. Fear, once a chain holding them down, was now a fire pushing them forward. They had felt what it meant to be protected, to be held close against the storm, and from that grew a courage they had never known. They pressed nearer to him, not out of weakness, but out of unity, their small roars carrying the promise of something greater. What began as terror was becoming strength, and in that moment they were no longer just cubs. They were learning to be brave. The battle raged on, and in the chaos, a stray bullet tore across the human's shoulder, burning through fabric and skin. Pain shot through him, but he did not move, did not even let out a sound that might frighten the cubs. His body remained firm, a wall of flesh and will standing between them and the storm. Blood warmed his sleeve, dripping slowly, yet his focus never wavered from the small lives huddled at his side. The cubs noticed, their wide eyes filled with both fear and awe, realizing he had taken the hurt without stepping back. He clenched his jaw, ignoring the sting, because for him, their safety mattered more than his own. The wound was real, but so was his resolve. In that moment, he was not just a soldier in a war, he was a guardian, refusing to yield no matter what it cost him. The sight of red seeping down the human's arm lit something fierce inside the cubs. Fear no longer chained their hearts. Instead, anger and fire surged through their small bodies. Their roars, once weak and shaky, now burst into the air with power and defiance, echoing across the battlefield. The sound carried beyond their size, filled with raw emotion, startling even hardened soldiers who turned their heads at the cry. They were no longer cowering children of war, but voices rising against it. Their eyes blazed, not with terror, but with strength borrowed from the human who bled for them. Every roar was a promise. They would not bow, they would not hide. The trembling of moments before had vanished, replaced by a boldness that spread through the air like fire. For the first time, the cubs stood tall, their voices a shield of fury beside the one who protected them. The battlefield, once drowned in noise and smoke, seemed to change with the sight before everyone's eyes. The cubs, no longer trembling, stood firm beside the human, their roars cutting through the chaos like a challenge to fear itself. Soldiers on both sides paused, their weapons trembling, unsure of what they were witnessing. It was more than just survival. It was a picture of unity, of courage born in the darkest place. To see fragile beings rise with such fire shifted the hearts of those nearby. Some soldiers felt their strength return, others felt doubt creep into their hands. The human, bleeding but unshaken, stood tall as their shield, his presence turning despair into hope. What should have been a moment of weakness instead became a symbol of resistance, and that symbol spread quickly, reshaping the rhythm of the fight. The battlefield itself was no longer the same. The fight did not end that day, but a single moment stood apart, carved into the memory of all who saw it. In the middle of smoke and gunfire, a human stood firm with cubs at his side, their small voices rising into roars that defied fear itself. For those who watched, it was more than courage. It was a reminder of what strength truly meant. Innocence and bravery had met on that battlefield, and together they created something larger than war. Soldiers who had grown numb to blood and loss felt their hearts stir, shaken by the sight of children standing unbroken. Even the enemies could not look away, confusion mixing with respect in their eyes. The moment passed quickly, swallowed by the noise of battle, but it remained fixed in the minds of all present, a memory that would not fade with time. Long after the battle was over and the smoke no longer stained the sky, the memory of that day refused to fade. Around fires, in homes, and across villages, people whispered the story again and again. They spoke of the cubs who once trembled in fear, and of the human who shielded them with his body when bullets filled the air. They spoke of the moment when the cubs found their voices, when their roars rose above the sound of war and struck deeper than any weapon. It was not just a tale of survival, but of courage born in the darkest place, a reminder that fear could be broken and strength could be shared. That roar did not die when the battlefield grew silent. It lived on, carried in hearts, remembered as the cry that turned weakness into defiance and defiance into hope.